The federal government is facing renewed pressure to meet its NATO defense spending targets as the Business Council of Canada wants the government to reach the 2% commitment by 2029-2030. Speaking today in Ottawa, Defense Minister Bill Blair pushed back against critics who say Canada must do more.
I consider the matter settled. We've said yes. I sometimes have a conversation with my critics and say, what part of yes was unclear? Because we know that we need to spend that much money. We know how much needs to be invested. But I want to make sure that when we invest those hard-earned Canadian taxpayer dollars in our national defense and in our Canadian armed forces, that we don't do that through mismanaging our procurement processes and simply spending more money on the things that we need. We need to make sure that we do it right.
Here to respond is Goldy Hyder, the President and CEO of the Business Council of Canada. He joins me now. Goldie, it's good to speak with you again.
Great to be with you, David.
So you're pushing the federal government to significantly speed up their timeline for defense spending by implementing a defense industrial-based strategy. Why is that the answer to get Canada to 2% and beyond?
Well, look, first of all, Canadians know the importance of keeping our word. We made a commitment to NATO that we would get to 2% of our GDP spending, and consecutive governments of different stripes have failed to get us there. But we're at a crossroads here now. The world is fundamentally changing. We're one of 8 countries only that's not meeting our targets in a 32-country organization. And what they're saying, and it's not just the Americans, it's also the Europeans saying is, no more freeloading. What got you here is not going to get you there. It's time to ante up. And it's time for you as Canada and Canadians to do more, not just for the obligations that you made, frankly, for your own national security, for your own security of your people. This is no longer, David, about thinking about this in terms of, weapons and tanks and all that. Of course, there's a component to that. It's about so much more. It's about satellites. It's about cybersecurity. It's about, dual-use technologies like AI and quantum. So there's an opportunity here for Canada to build a defense industrial base where we actually grow our economy, which allows you to support not just defense, but frankly, some of the social programs that become sustainable as opposed to being done on borrowed money as we're seeing right now. And you get the benefit of saying we're living up to our word, which, as I said, I think Canadians take very seriously.
But wouldn't this have to be done on borrowed money too? I mean, to get to 2% by the timeline you're suggesting, that's tens of billions of dollars extra per year to get there, right? I mean, it's a stretch to even get there by 2032.
Well, look, last week we had a government that borrowed $7 billion of your money, or your kids' money, actually, for what some have called, pre-election posturing. So, of course, you shouldn't be doing it on deficit financing. We're quite concerned about the fiscal framework. We have been calling consistently for a program review, a comprehensive program review. Let me give you a context. You appreciate history. In Jean Chrétien's government back in 1995, I believe, they did a comprehensive program review with much less revenues in the government and found $29 billion worth of savings. In today's dollars, that would be like finding $90 billion. So money is there. We have bloated the size of government, COVID being part of the reason, but the legacy seems to be lingering on. We need to take a hard look, and governments need to take a hard look at this. It's not up to you or me to decide. What we're saying is this is not about something like just, some straightforward across the board cut. Let's make some of the tough choices, because the worst thing you can do, David, is to try and tell Canadians the programs that you're introducing that they need are going to be there when in fact, they're very vulnerable to the smallest adjustment and take a credit downgrade. It would lead to cuts. So you're duping people to say, I'm giving you something and I'm going to take it away from you. That's not the way to go about this.
Well, look, I do remember the John Chrétien program review, Goldie, because it meant my tuition kept increasing as I was going through university. Me and all of my friends graduated with much higher debts than we expected when we graduated from high school, right? So there is a cost in making these choices, right? And this is the challenge. I mean, to meet the defense spending, it's 5-6 years of national childcare, for example, just for a single year to get to 2%, right? So is a program review enough, or do certain things that we do right now have to go away?
No, it's a fair point that it's not just about one side of the ledger. In fact, the whole point of the paper is to say we have an opportunity here. This is not one that we need to just be worried. We can actually seize the moment to leverage Canada's strengths. We have the critical minerals. We have the energy. We have the nuclear capabilities. We have the AI innovation and technology that's taking place. We have a vibrant aerospace sector. We need to use procurement policy much more smartly rather than be punitive for Canadian companies. We need to include Canadian companies in that prosperity and that growth. We need to make sure that that growth that comes from our economy, where taxes are being paid by people with good jobs, that is allocated to defense spending as we go forward. David, this is not a choice anymore. I mean, you were in Halifax, I believe, and the security forum that just took place there. It's not a question of we should be concerned that Donald Trump's being president. On the contrary, what we're seeing here is Republicans and Democrats for some time now have been saying, Canada, you're falling so far behind that we wonder whether you're a serious participant in the G7, whether you should be in the Five Eyes. We've left you out of the North Pacific conversation. We're working with Australia and others in the Quad. The list goes on here, David, and this is where I think Canadians do realize that you can't outsource your security. You have a responsibility as a government to the sovereignty and the safety and well-being of our citizens, and this is job one. Obviously, It's difficult to make decisions, but that's why you sought public office, and now you need to make those decisions.
No, and look, with what's happened in Ukraine and a repositioning of the defense postures of the European allies as well, I mean, there is a peer group pressure to do this. But you talk about doing this as well, Goldy, as sort of like as an economic growth opportunity, and talk about Canada should make high-risk, high-reward bets on energy and AI and aerospace. If this is really about continental defense and having military capacity to show up to NATO exercises, pulling your weight, should you make high-risk bets, or should you just stock up on what you need to have the military capacity that the country and the alliance requires?
Yeah. Well, our government just made a $25 billion bet on 2 foreign companies investing in electrical vehicle battery plants, all of which around the world are being reduced in consumption and production. So you can make these bets, but what is more important than the safety and security of your own country? That is job one, protecting the sovereignty. And as I said, this is not something we're doing for others. Yes, we're doing it to keep our word, but we're doing it for us. The cyber attacks that are coming into the country are affecting Canadians. Mischief that's taking place, foreign interference, all of these things form a part of your national security and your defense. And what we're saying is work with the United States. We have the blessing of the geography that we do. Integrate your defense community and your defense space. Create a supply chain, lift up the small, medium enterprises and others. This is an opportunity if we have the leadership, the partnership, and I think it's available to us, David. I just hope that opportunities like this create a conversation amongst Canadians about why this is so important, not just for today, but for years to come.
Right, but I wonder, if you don't have enough planes, you don't have enough boats, you don't have enough tanks, you don't have enough helicopters, how do you pivot the money you are going to spend towards high risk, high reward bets? I get aerospace, AI and energy. These are things the country maybe should do as part of industrial policy. But how can that be part of defense policy when the gap in capacity is there and expensive?
Yeah, well, it's not either or. We've taken a very long time to create these problems. We're going to have to find some quick fixes on some of the more material things. And we've been talking about a deep sea port in the Arctic, for example. The Americans are extremely interested in the Arctic with Korea and Japan. They're having conversations about that. We know we've been behind in purchasing some of the equipment, but let's get going on some of these opportunities that are available to us as well. In terms of building that industrial base where Canadians can benefit from, can have jobs and can create the prosperity and the wealth that really allows then for the sustainability of the very social programs that government is now financing through basically deficit funding.
Well, just as a final point, Goldy, when you listen to what Republicans and Democrats are saying south of the border, and now Trump is a bit of a, shall we say, protectionist president when it comes to his weaponization and use of tariffs.
We have a bill moving through Parliament on protectionism, by the way. But
well, yes, I understand. In very specific sectors, as opposed to a global 10% to 20% tariff and the tearing up potentially of trade arrangements, right, which is what he has done in the past. How do you view the connection between a more aggressive push to 2% and the sustaining of that north-south trade relationship? Do you really think that could be at risk if Canada isn't a bigger player in defense?
We do, and it's not just something that we're imagining. This is something that, again, Republicans and Democrats have been saying no longer in the back rooms of Washington, very overtly, very loudly and clearly, right in Halifax, in Montreal, on your show, on other shows, saying, look, the gig is up. You can no longer get away with saying you're on your way to getting there and it's way out there. You have to be faster, and we need to get you there. And yes, that is coming up in the context of the discussions around the USMCA. And there again, that's an existential issue for Canada. We need that trade agreement, preferably done trilaterally. We encourage it to be done trilaterally as businesses for whom these trade agreements are made. this is an opportunity, as I keep saying, but we can't come at it weak. And you can't come at it by pretending that you can throw, some other country under the bus and hope nobody notices about where you're a laggard. They're telling us where we're a laggard, David, and we can't afford to be that way, whether it's on digital, whether it's on defense, or whether it's on supply management, those kinds of issues. Americans have made it very clear, but it's in our interest to respond to that, not just because they're saying so, because it's the right thing to do.
Goldy Hyder, the President and CEO of the Business Council of Canada. Thanks for your time today, sir.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is defending Canada's record on military spending. Here he is addressing the 70th annual session of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly in Montreal.
We ended up stepping up big time when we took office in 2015, doubled our spending on defense, on our way to tripling the spending in defense by 2030. We are on a clear path to reach 2% in the coming years, because we know that the world is changing and Canada, along with our allies, needs to be ready for it.
Meanwhile, in Ottawa, the head of the Business Council of Canada, Goldy Hyder, voiced his concerns about defense spending. He fears what will happen if Canada doesn't move up its timeline and reach that 2% target sooner than planned.
What could be more important than Canadians' national security and their personal security? If all signals from the United States and others is, you got to shape up or we will ship you out, I don't think that's a bluff. I think we have to take that very seriously.
Okay, we're going to start there with the Power Panel. Kelly Kreiderman is the Globe and Mail's reporter in Calgary. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister. Brad Levine is a former national campaign director for the NDP. And in Ottawa, Vandana Cotter is a former advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. It's good to see you all. Folks, happy Monday. Lisa, I'd like to start with you on the question of Canada and NATO spending. I mean, Justin Trudeau correctly points out they tripled the rate of spending from the around 1% to about 1.7%, where they hope to be by the end of this decade, and then on to 2%. Can they really move it as fast and as large as Goldy Hyder and others are suggesting, just based on the way defense spending works in this country?
You can. Absolutely. Why can't you? If you're in government, you control a lot of the levers at which you can use in order to move procurement forward. And quite frankly, you just got to put some effort into it. You got to put some focus on the execution of these procurement strategies to make sure that the money is getting spent in the way. I feel that this government is always a day late and a dollar short, quite frankly. They are now saying that they have been always interested in funding the military. I don't believe that for a second. I very distinctly remember his comments about the F-35, which we are now purchasing, by the way, again, late in the game. And we have to take this matter seriously. It's something that is openly commented on by the United States representatives, as well as those in the Trump administration, as well as in the Biden administration. So whatever he says is going to be taken as literal. It will be measured against. And actually, the economy of Canada is at risk on this one.
Okay, so Vandana, let me rephrase it slightly. Can Canada do it without cutting a whole bunch of other things that this government has committed to, and the future either like tax cuts and tax reform plans that the possible next government in Pierre Poilievre has promised to do? Because it is tens of billions of dollars each and every year to do this.
Well, I think the government has already put out their plan on how they'll make their 2%. I think, and I actually liked what Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland said today, where he said it has to be prioritized based on our economic priorities and what Canadians need right now. I don't think at a time when Canadians are still suffering and there's an affordability crisis to cut on investments like the CCB or on childcare. I think we've made that clear, and having been in those rooms, I'm sure they wouldn't have made that plan without knowing that our NATO allies would be supportive of this and know that Canada has always been at the table. There's a number of ways to be a good NATO ally. We've been part of missions like in Latvia, but also let's remember some of these big procurement options like the F-35s, like ships, like proposed submarine fleets, icebreakers. They are big ticket items, and this government has invested more than any past government has.
So Brian, how do you see this? I mean, the Liberals say they have a plan to get to 2%. The business community is saying you need to go beyond that, as are some European countries and the new Secretary General of NATO. The Conservatives haven't committed to hit 2% with any sort of clarity, only to work towards the target. I mean, do you feel there's extra pressure for them to accelerate beyond where they are at this state in the game?
Well, now what I think what the Business Council has done is brought in some domestic pressure onto the government of Canada. We've had lots of external, both from Trump and lots of Americans. Goldy Hyder mentioned, Democrats and Republicans have been calling on us to meet our commitment. Again, we've already signed on to this commitment, and we failed to do so up until very recently, and it's still 8 years away. So now what we're seeing is the business community saying, look, we've got a Trump administration coming in at the end of January, and we do not want, the business community does not want them to use our inability to meet our obligations that we've signed on to harm the business, the economic flow between our two countries. And so I think it's an interesting one. We'll see where else domestically that pressure comes from. And it'll be interesting to see what Trump does once taking office, whether or not he will wait to see if there's a change in government at the federal government level in perhaps 10 months or 8 months from then. To see whether or not pressure from the White House is enough, or will they take real measures against Canada in the short term, or wait to see if there's a change in government next October?
Kelly, how do you see this? I mean, a week ago, Doug Ford was kind of really freaking out about Donald Trump coming in saying, we got to get rid of Mexico and we got to start renegotiating bilats now. Now it's the business community saying we got to move faster on defense. Like there is an urgency here caused by the pending new management regime coming in south of the border.
And the premiers were speaking about these NATO targets. Even this summer, they were urging the federal government to get serious about at least talking about that 2% of GDP target. And the premiers advise on this. And we're not just talking conservative premiers like Doug Ford. We're talking premiers like Wab Kinew in Manitoba as well. And I think, you look at the problems that Canada might have with the Trump administration. And the three biggies are trade, immigration, and NATO. And to me, NATO spending is the one that is the least controversial. Canada is moving towards this target anyways. What we have not been is robust enough in speaking about it and planning for it, being serious about it. The Trudeau government is right, or the Prime Minister is right, that defense spending was at 1%, just over 1% of GDP when he came to office in 2015. They have boosted it. Then in 2023, they cut. And what I don't understand is when they realized that a second Trump presidency was possible, even likely, why they didn't get more serious about their numbers, about their messaging on this. You have defense numbers on this that completely underestimate GDP growth in Canada going to 2030, which makes it look like the increases in spending won't be as much. And I think that's the problem. There has not been a robust plan and messaging on this.
Yeah, I know there's been some issues about the GDP. The PBO uses one set of numbers. The issue is that NATO uses the OECD. So Canada's got to be measured against the OECD because that's the NATO standard. But, there is some suggestion the GDP will be higher, right? And that makes it harder to hit the target. But Lisa, on that point, there's a capability gap in the military. And if you listen to what Goldy Hyder is proposing, that he suggests that the government of Canada should make some high-risk, high-reward bets on things like AI and energy and aerospace. If you need to do it quickly and you need to build capability, can you do high-risk, high-reward bets? Or do you just need to buy what you know works and what you know the military needs?
I think what you have to do is work with your partner in the United States and figure out what it is you can do in order to shore up exactly what it is that they need. Canadians for way too long have depended upon the United States as the protector and the defender. And we've gotten away with it, quite frankly. And I think what we're hearing from our parties in NATO as well as the United States, both Biden and Trump, is that time is over. And it's time for you now to show us that you're serious, that you care about your own defense, and that you care about your own sovereignty. And we do have to react. I can't tell you chapter and verse how they're going to go about and do it because I'm no longer on the inside. But what I can tell you is that I do believe that the military has the capability and capacity to figure out what it is that they need, what it is that they want, and how to go out and get it, and that we should be listening to them and we should get it done as quickly as possible. I know, David, I appreciate where you're coming from in the last segment where you want to pit military spending up against childcare, but come on. I mean, we've got an existential threat happening in the world right now. And if we're going to be telling Canadians that you're going to lose your childcare subsidies if we invest in the military, I actually think that's actually irresponsible and reckless. I don't agree with that framing whatsoever. And I really dislike it when I hear anyone talking about it in that way.
Okay, no, I wasn't trying to pit one against the other. I was just giving a sense of the scale. Everyone talks about how expensive the National Child Care Program. The defense targets in a single year is 4 to 5 times larger than that. So that means choices have to be made, you know, in terms of what you get rid of.
Use Indigenous services then. Then use Indigenous services. That's a better comparator in terms of the size. You went for the childcare because you want to get it to Canadians that Conservatives are going to cut childcare to bolster the military, and nothing can be
No, that's not what I was doing, Lisa. I was just using an example of a current new program, a new priority by this government, one they chose to build in and expand in, instead of hitting the 2% targets and saying they've committed this money here with the demand to commit money there. I wasn't trying to draw any kind of a partisan line. I was just trying to say this is a choice this government has made. Do you roll back some of these new programs to hit this because of the economic urgency? It's just, however we do this as a country, Lisa, there's going to be choices that have to be made. I mean, maybe it's Indigenous service. If you have other examples, I mean, feel free to put them on the table. It's just one that I saw and use as a measuring point. So. Anyway, I wasn't trying to create any kind of a partisan argument. It's just that that's a new program, and that's how much it costs. Vandana, on another quick topic, Canada's premiers, they are calling for a meeting with the Prime Minister, and they want it ahead of Donald Trump's inauguration. And Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who's chairing the premiers right now, he wrote to Justin Trudeau on their behalf and said, as part of this Team Canada approach, we require clarity from you about how you propose to include and engage with premiers as we enter the review of the Canada-United States-Mexico agreement, including who among your cabinet ministers will serve as lead for your government. Vandana, what do you make of that request? The getting together is one thing, but knowing whatever the plans are for the cabinet and whatever roles they might play on this file.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's already been out there with the CAN-US committee that's been reinstated. I think they just want to show that they're included, they're a part of this. I think they want to show to their own voters, especially Doug Ford, looking to have an early election to show that he's a part of this as well. There is an IGA minister in Monsieur Leblanc. I think he'll be, leading a lot of that work. But, in terms of asking for me, the Prime Minister, or just showing or finding ways to ensure that premiers feel that they are part of this work, obviously provinces across the country are going to be a part and affected by any new trade agreement. So, I think nothing wrong with the request, but I think there's a number of ways that can happen. But I think the cabinet members who are going to play a role have been announced to that cabinet committee.
Brad, what are your thoughts on it? Do you think it is as simple as that? Chrystia Freeland chairs the cabinet committee, and that's what they're going to deal with. But there probably should be a first ministers meeting on this, given everything that's at stake with this change south of the border, right?
That certainly couldn't hurt. I think it's kind of bold that the chair of the Council of the Federation is asking the Prime Minister not only for, a meeting is straightforward. These meetings happen all the time, but to say who are your reps that are going to be in place. We know, and we've talked about it on the Monday Power Panel, we've got a number of cabinet ministers who are doing double duty. We just Randy Boissonneau, the Alberta member of Parliament, Liberal, just stepped down last week. So I found it quite bold, actually, that Premier Ford would say, who's on your team, almost acting as a counterweight, a little bit of something maybe that the official opposition would normally play. Could this be a new kind of, with the weakness of Trudeau, could the Council of the Federation, accelerate its prominence in setting the agenda? Certainly, Premier Ford's take on whether or not Mexico should be included in a new round of trade talks, but now he's saying who's on your team. I found that quite bold and an indication as to what we might see in the balancing of power going forward as we swear in Donald Trump late January.
Well, Kelly, I'm old enough to remember when the premiers wrote a letter saying all levels of government should stay in their lane, because that was July, and they sent it to the Prime Minister, and here we are. I mean, what do you make of this?
Yeah, they sent a note on carbon pricing too. I think they always get listened to on everything that they request for the federal government. I think it speaks to the importance of this file right now, and we have a federal Liberal government that I think everybody can agree is distracted by its own domestic political troubles in a major way. I think we saw GST holiday announcement and the $250 checks roll out. Stuff that was kind of written kind of quickly to deal with a election that's coming. And I think the premiers want some assurance that there is going to be a strong cabinet member who's dedicated to this and who's kind of overseeing it in a holistic way, so things don't go sideways based on maybe domestic political interests, where you have a federal Liberal government that might try to compare Pierre Poilievre to Trump as a way of creating support for the Liberals. I think the provinces want to make sure that the eye is on the ball. When we talk about the NATO spending, the reason is trade, right? Like that.
Yep.
Everything could trickle down and have an effect on how the Trump administration views its relationship with Canada, it being such a trade partner. And certainly from where I sit in Alberta, a province like Alberta doesn't feel like its trading interests have always been represented by this federal government.
No, and there is at times an incoherence when the government will say we must do what we can to hit our climate targets because we signed an international agreement, but then prevaricate and delay on spending targets, even though they signed onto that with the NATO alliance.